Ladies and gentlemen, the Planning Board of the Village of Southampton will come into session for its September, was it 4th meeting of this year. I'll entertain a motion the meeting be called to order.
Make a motion to call the September meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Board to order.
Thank you.
Second?
Second. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're now in order. We have an agenda that some people may have. With your tolerance, I would like to have us reverse the first two so that we can deal with finish a very small matter on the on Pond Lane for FHW for the winery property, which is a matter that's been before us for some time. It's been through environmental review and all the necessary steps that come to move a line with respect to a series of lots. We will have to finish up the approval again of all the environmental review formally another time, but I will entertain a motion that I will entertain a motion, thank you, Charlie, that the application be approved by the board, unless, do you have any comments about this? Jane?
No, I think what everyone knows, we're switching to item number 2 on the agenda.
Yeah, item 2, first, just to get that done.
Can I just interject here? Just formally, for the record, you should authorize the adoption of the neg deck, which
Okay.
is...
Formally, yes, right.
This is, like you said, a lot line modification. It's going to result in transferring 34,000 square feet from one lot to the other.
Yeah, as you all know,
Okay, so
our board does very few things. One of the 5 things we're supposed to do under the code relate to subdivisions and the moving of lots that get rearranged. This is one of those. A lot line is going to change with the acreage that's there on Pond Lane, to change the lines a little bit between 2 of the lots, and therefore it falls under our code on this board's jurisdiction. It's not planning, it's an execution issue that is given to us. And what our advisor is saying is there are 2 issues in it. One is to affirm formally the environmental review that has taken place over the last several months, and then secondly, to approve, subject to your getting, Kathy, you'll give us the environmental review formally shortly.
Well, so first of all, this is the public hearing, so you need to, you do need to open it up for comment.
I'll get to that.
But you can, prior to that, I mean, you can adopt the neg deck, which just it evaluated the transfer of 34,000 square feet of one lot to another to balance out the size of the lots.
Okay.
So before you close the public hearing tonight, if you do, but you do need to open it up for...
Well, in terms of procedure, I think I'd like to get the motion in front of the House, as they say, and any people who would like to comment are invited to come up and tell us, give us their views if they think this should not be done.
You need to declare the public meeting open.
Make a motion to hold the public hearing, to open the public hearing for FHW Limited Partnership.
Seconded.
Aye.
Aye.
Evening. For the applicant, Gilbert G. Flanagan, 21 South Main Street, Southampton. I think that it's been summarized in full, so I won't take much of your time. I do have an affidavit of posting, an affidavit of mailing for the record.
Again, okay.
Just to remind you, there are 2 aspects to this request. One is to approve the lot line, and the other is to reaffirm the location of the driveway curb
Driveways.
cuts that
Right.
were part of the original subdivision. So no change for that at all, but under your subdivision approval, you were retaining jurisdiction over that, so I'm asking you to do that too.
Thank
Do you
you.
have any questions? I'll sit
Thank you,
down.
Bill. Anyone in the audience have objections to this? The two main features of our, in effect, think of it as a subdivision approval. If not, we'll
Mr. Chairman, I
entertain.
make a motion to close the public hearing.
Jane,
Neg deck first, please.
close the public hearing.
Neg deck first, please.
Okay, we'd like a motion that the neg deck be approved by this board. So moved?
So moved.
I'll second it.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the neg declaration has been approved. Now we'll entertain a motion that we,
I repeat the motion to close the public hearing in view of the fact there's no public comment.
yeah. I thought we closed it. Didn't we close it?
I don't think we voted on that yet.
Okay, second.
I'll vote on that.
Aye.
Okay, it's closed. I thought we closed it. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Okay. We can then, this is a, we have to approve, Bo, do we approve this now? Subject to getting the,
No, you can move on, to East End Holdings.
okay.
Just announce the continuation of the public hearing.
All right. We're not continuing this public hearing.
We're terminating FHW, that's been closed.
We're terminating.
You're now on to East End Holdings.
That's fine, but on FHW, we're not passing a resolution.
Correct.
To close it
Next
yet. Next time.
Next month.
Next month. That's what I meant. We've got to wait a month to
do a
finish.
resolution to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, the second item today, the first on the list, is East End Holdings. I'll entertain a motion that we hear comment on East End Holdings. I believe that this matter is eligible now for comment. Precisely, the application has been placed under further review by us.
No, you're continuing the public hearing.
There's some issues.
Continuing the public hearing.
Motion to continue
We
the
didn't,
public
we never
hearing.
closed it.
Correct.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion that we
Motion to
continue.
continue the public hearing of East End Holdings at 3242 Jobs Lane.
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Okay. It'll be continued. In the public hearing,
For the applicant, Gilbert G. Flanagan, 21 South Main Street, Southampton. I just want to make sure you have certain things in the record that were submitted after the last public hearing, which I mentioned at the work session, but just so that the record can be clear. I had submitted a letter/memorandum on August 27th, which was the date of your work session, addressing certain of the issues which had come up at the public hearing on August 6th, including some comments about the SEQRA issue, the nature of the fact that the courtyard, which is a focal point of this discussion, is a privately owned space. It is under the control of the property owner. I want to point out one thing which may have been a misunderstanding. I believe that Susan Madonia had thought that the mechanical equipment for the proposed new buildings was to be located on the property line. In fact, what she sees on the map are the utility meters for the utilities that would service the properties. The actual mechanicals will be located on the roof of the building, so there will be no mechanical structures or equipment adjacent to her property line. I also submitted a separate memo on the same date discussing the history of the property and including a copy of the village's real property card, which shows that the improvements were built in 1976 when the C of O was issued. I also submitted with that letter an attachment which I found in the village records, which is a compilation of non-contributing properties to the historic district in this particular area, and the subject properties, in fact, are listed expressly as non-contributing, open quote, modern commercial building, close quote. So lest there be any question that these buildings have historic significance, having been built in 1976, I think that should address that issue. They are not contributing to the historic district. Now, just a couple of other comments. I have seen that there have been numerous communications submitted to the village by residents, some within the village and some without the village, and I would point out to you that in the main they are generalized comments which address the aesthetics of the courtyard area. There's nothing specific. There have been suggestions by several people that perhaps a more suitable use for this property would be that of a restaurant. Well, as many of you may know, installing another restaurant, a new restaurant in this area is virtually impossible, in large part because of health department sanitary flow requirements. Furthermore, to have a restaurant with any meaning, more than a few seats would require substantial off-street parking relief, greatly in excess of what we're seeking. So that is a non-starter. In fact, my client had even asked whether or not there could be some food service aspect of this, and the answer was unfortunately not. So that, I think it's important that you understand that we have looked at alternatives, and that having a restaurant or a cafe or something of that nature is just not viable. It bears repeating that this is a traditional type of development. It is consistent with the development of most, if not most, of the buildings located on Main Street and Jobs Lane. To repeat, once again, it is not a mall or a strip mall. It is 3 buildings which would run from the street line southerly to a point which would still allow us to install 6 off-street parking spaces on site where none currently exist, and also to provide the so-called IA sanitary systems, which are the best system that's available. And I will point out to you that we've done some research for commercial projects. At this point, those systems are not required. They are required for residential, but they are not for commercial. My client has volunteered and is willing to incur the considerable extra expense of installing those facilities. And as I've also mentioned, we have had extensive discussions with the Suffolk County Health Department about the design of those systems, and we've made substantial headway with them. But as you probably know, they can't finally act on the application until review is conducted further with this board. And one thing I will submit to you this evening is a letter from Dagmar Phillips. Now, she is the daughter-in-law of Herman Phillips, who was one of the original developers of this property back in 1976. And among other, I won't read it, but among other things, it points out the difficulty that since its inception that this property had of being rented, particularly in the stores located off Jobs Lane proper. This family has had substantial experience with Jobs Lane. It owned the old Boot Tree building, which is now, I believe, Gildor, and certain other buildings on Main Street and Jobs Lane. One of the problems that also is faced with this particular property is that not only can the majority of the stores not find a tenant, but in fact, there is added maintenance of the courtyard with absolutely no return. Now, furthermore, I represent to you that I spoke today with Morley Quattrochi, whom most of you know is familiar with real estate and in fact manages many commercial properties in the village. And he's going to be providing me with information, a substantial history of the difficulty, if not impossibility, of renting some of, if not all of those stores in the rear. And from what he's told me, a major concern of certain other business owners in the property in the area is that the only people who have looked at these buildings have been the so-called pop-up stores. And apparently that I'm told there's a feeling within the established business community that that is not the most desirable kind of retail business to be conducted. So I would offer this for the record. And obviously my client is submitting this with the knowledge that Mrs. Phillips is in fact in favor of the application and believes it should be approved. So I'll offer that up to you. I know that you've had a lot of communications from various people, but I would point out to you that this is not a popularity contest. The Southampton nursing home wasn't a popularity contest. The hospital parking lot wasn't a popularity contest. What you should be guided by is the standards contained in section 116-38, capital B of the Village Code, which talks about site plan review. I would encourage you to look at those because they are very specific things that you're supposed to examine. And the purpose of what we've submitted is to demonstrate that we believe that what we have presented is consistent with those standards. So I would ask you really to focus on those. If you have any questions of me, I'd be happy to. Oh, there's one other thing I'll mention to you before I conclude. A question was raised at the August 6th public hearing about the possible problem with the electric meter that's located on the Madonia building. And the architects are here. They have examined the situation, and it turns out that the way the construction is proposed, and I see Mr. McFarland has a copy of that in front of him, the building will be no closer, that space will be no less than it is now. So there would be no change in that. It would not be necessary for that meter to be relocated by virtue of our project. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them, as would Mr. Lehman, who is the architect.
Any questions from anybody?
No.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Would anyone, Simi? Wait just 1 second. We got a few people. We'll get, anyone who wishes to speak succinctly, we'll get a turn.
Good evening, board members, Chairman. I'm Sian Aksani. I'm here today presenting myself as a resident of Southampton Village. Reason I'm here is for a number of years chaired the Southampton Planning Commission,
Right.
and during those years we worked extensively on developing a village business master plan, village business district master plan. We basically, I'll shed a little bit of light on the history of that, just to put things in context. I won't take much of your time, but this was in the context of when the Rogers Memorial Library moved to the other side of the village, the Parish Museum left the village, and the post office also moved down to North Sea Road. And in the absence of these three main institutions that basically supported and anchored the pedestrian livelihood of the village, we took this master plan study, which led basically to its adoption and also adoption of certain zoning laws down the line in 2014 to address the sustainability of this village. And there were key objectives that were formulated in this study. And I'd just like to quickly run these seven key objectives, and the first four specifically pertain to this site, which basically number one was preserve the unique historic fabric, new like old, which basically we relied on Main Street and Job's Lane's architecture and history to project that kind of architecture on the rest of the village, that being Windmill Lane and Nugent Street, which were prone to be redeveloped and still are prime for redevelopment. So in that sense, basically both Main Street and Job's Lane were looked at as a preservation of this village and not a redevelopment of those areas. We learned from those areas and from Main Street and Job's Lane, and one of the key factors as far as scaling it was walkability. Basically, there was a radius of 1,200 linear feet that would define the parameter of this study, and that was again anchored in the village residents being able to walk around the village. Integrated circulation and parking strategy was another one, that to combine and focus parking in certain areas that would be very accessible, again, as a pedestrian throughout the village, so that this would basically create infrastructure helping in the transition between vehicular and pedestrian circulation. And then maintain a year-round central focus, which is again the focus of the center of the village being the center and not a sprawl moving on as far as retail and commercial into the other sections of the village. And there are 3 or 4 other items that mostly pertain to Windmill Lane as far as stormwater management, making art a defining characteristic of this village, and improving the sustainability of stormwater handling vis-a-vis Lake Agawam. One of the key aspects that we looked at in this pedestrian connectivity in the village was the little alleyways and sidewalks that connected to main sidewalks of the village. One of the successful ones was basically, and the first one was the connection that we made from Main Street to the back entrance of the Southampton Historical Museum. This is presently also used by San Ambrose Restaurant as seating, but also functions as an entrance to the Southampton Historical Museum. Main issue being that once the public went down Main Street, they would take a right on Job's Lane and not taking a left to the entrance of the museum. And since that alleyway was established, the attendance to the museum has increased by 25%. We extended that across the street next to Village Hall alleyway that, again, even Silver's Restaurant has some seating over there, and that was basically bringing back an old entrance to the old Parish Museum, which is presently Southampton Arts Centre, paved that. And again, these were elements that we picked up and built up based on what we found in the existing village. And primarily that was on Job's Lane with these walkways walkways and these courtyards that are existent. Now, I am not here to propose preservation of these courtyards necessarily, but the connection of the pedestrians to, for instance, the parking in the back of what is being proposed and in front of you today is a key ingredient as far as this connection between vehicular and pedestrian movement. We have a very elongated parking in the back of these lots that its main access point is from Lake Agawam Park. But there are at least 3 or 4 connected pedestrian connections from Job's Lane to this parking. I insist that basically the board take a look at these, and I've made copies of these objectives for the board members and also a copy of the draft of the initial report, which I'm going to submit to the board. And in making this decision, whether we maintain the actual courtyard or reduce that in scale, but the key factor being maintaining a connectivity between Job's Lane and the parking in the back is crucial for pedestrian livelihood in this village. Thank you.
Send me a question. Are you still on the?
No, I stepped
board
down
that
from the
does the
board
planning?
in 2014.
Okay, you stopped doing it, all right. And the plan, by accident, I have had for years, since 2010, this report, which you may recognize the green color of, which the Aaron Krantz Exton firm did, which I think was probably part of what went into your commission when you were active. You were chairman then?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. And again, I will try to repeat for the record for everybody, for reasons known to our forebears, we are not a, quote, planning, close board, and in our site review, under, as we heard a few minutes ago, we have a number of standards that do apply to us. We are supposed to look under subsection D of the code to a little phrase that says existing development and master plan. And I'm assuming this is in some form adopted by the then trustees to be part of the master plan.
Yes, it is.
In getting at this discussion, you're an expert. I've watched your work on a lot of things, but the retail and municipal centers seem to have a variance from time to time as to what people think makes sense. We have had heard submissions that, for instance, when it comes to municipal planning, more banks is terrible. Getting more banks won't make everybody, to accomplish the goals you mentioned of getting people in. Did you guys go through those type of uses? I mean, I've heard things that say you need only a sufficient drugstores, they're bad. There are all sorts of things that, since the 50s, people dealing with urban and municipal plans, and one of the issues is open spaces. They cut both ways. If they're there and they're not used, you've got an issue. We've got some. The plan has them. I know most of them. If they can be used, for instance, for a restaurant, marvelous. Everybody seems to say, why doesn't Southampton have more restaurants and catch up with East Hampton or whatever, plumbing and so forth? But if they're not used, I gather that it's a double-edged sword when it comes to what I'll call municipal planning. And since we have an expert for a minute, or a former expert, what was reviewed in that study about, let's say, the alleyway by the Village Hall, for instance, the one that runs right there, is, I agree, very good. It sort of goes to the Rogers Building, connects with back here, this park. Great idea, fabulous idea. Silver's, according to the newspaper, may not be, its continuation may be over, so will it be, some type of a restaurant or a food service? I think it's expanded a little bit for food service, must make people happy. But what did you learn about that?
So, to be exact, we never focused on function. Function is a matter of economy. Depending on the need, property owners and the economy can decide as to what kind of a function goes there. We basically, our focus was form. To give you an example, for instance, throughout the stretch of Nugent and Windmill Lane, we have a number of drive-through banks and, say, Rite Aid and a number of other buildings, including the old post office, that were all sitting back from from these streets with setbacks in the front, major setbacks in the front, and driveways and so forth. We never insisted, oh, these have to be shifted to some other use, be that restaurant or retail or anything, but we did insist that whatever that use is going to occupy that space has to shift its front to the street in order to define the street.
Right.
So that was a definition of form. In certain areas, we actually defined that they have to sit back and define open spaces. For instance, on the corner of Nugent and Windmill, presently there is a park, and off of that park is a drive-through bank. We actually defined forms that would increase in density dramatically what's there presently, but create a clear street wall defining that square, basically. So function was not an issue, whether that wants to be occupied by a bank or a restaurant or even residences or a hotel, which were all adopted as permissible uses in this zone.
To get a street by it, so people could get there.
Correct. We did define a street there.
I'll interrupt you, but I understand the principle is, as you said a minute ago, to get people, whoever they are, residents, to go by these places.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. So that there would be more exposure and connection and a definition between the street and the built environment. And basically, it's a traditional definition of streetscape, which is defined by its walls. To that extent, when you start creating walls, you have to create openings in that wall. Those openings are, of course, entrances to the buildings. We did define in this study the characteristics of these openings, what they should be as far as whether, again, not getting into what the function is going to be, what those characteristics are going to be dependent on a typology study of the existing entrances to, which we saw on Main Street. And among them also were these pedestrian walks in between buildings. We defined a minimum distance. I don't recall exactly what that was. I think it was minimum 5 feet, which is very
I think the study said 12 would be
I stand corrected then. I stand corrected.
Maybe it wasn't adopted.
12 feet.
That was the study that was up.
Correct. I mean, it's been a number of years since,
Okay.
and many pages that
not a
that study
quiz.
undertook.
No.
But 12 feet
But it's a
was
concept that's
the concept, basically, a definition of these pedestrian walks, and we defined actually even the proximity of how often they should occur as far as establishing some sort of a pattern throughout the street, so that there would be these pedestrian connections between buildings and connecting the front and the back of the building. And in this case, the whole idea is that this village is not dependent only on the front of the building, that the back of the buildings are a secondary front. I mean, we know that Dosha property was purchased by the village. The park has been extended over there. So these are properties that the village has expanded and collected in the recent history. There still hasn't been much of a development as to the nature of these parks, but that's another front for the building. To that extent, as far as the grounds of the Southampton Art Center, the old parish museum, we definitely have the very clear definition of the brick wall and gates and the steps that we opened up on Job's Lane side of it. The next step,
You led that opening.
I led that opening as far as making that park more accessible to the public. But the next step is actually further definition of that ground and of that park on the parking site. Not to create a wall or a building necessarily, although we did accommodate a building footprint for the expansion of the, at the time, parish museum. But the next step is to define another front for the Southampton Art Center on the parking site. To that extent, again, I want to go back to the Job's Lane site that you have in front of you, that's not necessarily the back of the building. The back of the building in coming future could be another front for that property.
Well, the study identified 8 years ago, it was 2 walkthroughs to the south area. The park. What is the parking area? There are 2 walkthroughs. It didn't say, it recommended a lot of other walkthroughs, as you may remember.
No,
Just
we
that old
didn't.
study. They wanted them
We
in
didn't.
other places in the village.
We were not specific, and actually to that extent, again, I like to reiterate that this is not a case where the village or the public will be taking or providing public amenities at the expense of a private property owner. There was talk, I know, at some point about even maybe CPF stepping in and reimbursing for implementation of something. I don't know if that's the solution or
It
not.
seems to me, maybe everyone will disagree here, but if, that's saying it's money. And since the taxpayers, some of them have paid for CPF, okay, it's other people's money. Yeah, if something happens privately, changes are made. I agree with you 100%. CPF is hopefully useful for more than what it's done in the past, but I don't believe our board is asked, even what little we do, to sit and arbitrate money.
I
I'm with
don't
you.
think that's
But the
within our
plan, this is
purview.
still the plan then, as far as you know, from our charge for existing and development plan, this is still
Correct.
the village's plan that at least the trustees of 5 years ago or 4 years, whatever it was, have adopted.
Correct.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Simi? Roy?
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Sami.
Simi?
Sami?
Simi? Simi,
We need you back.
we need your education. You've got the experience that we need. It comes from, people like the Southampton Association who've done studies on retail. I know that because
Yes,
I've been to
indeed,
those
yes.
sessions that even someone went before your board when you
Correct.
were running it. You're sort of our disposed expert. You're a former president, okay? You were in action. You've done this before.
Does the master plan have any legislative teeth? Can it require
Yes.
people to do things?
Yes, we did adopt in 2014 a number of zoning changes, again, pertaining to height of buildings, pertaining to size of some of these walkways, to use, definitely, because there were some uses that were not allowed, such as second-floor apartment buildings or even a hotel. Actually, a hotel was, if I'm not mistaken, a special exception pre-existing, but the apartments were not, and that was introduced. Of course, all of these were conditioned on, as you heard just earlier tonight, health department and the septic system, and maybe in the future, the introduction of a treatment plant. And that treatment plant would basically provide the impetus for redevelopment of some of these sites. And the key, again, this was, if you remember back in early 2000, that's when the whole debate about sizes of houses was raging in the village. And the village was always in a position of crisis management. And that's when basically the Planning Commission approached the trustees that rather than waiting for another applicant to come forward and then we creating another crisis for the village, let's be proactive and undertake this study. These are sites, again, the sites being the post office, some of the drive-thrus, Rite Aid, and so forth that are there right now at the moment, that eventually at some point are going to be redeveloped. And rather than wait for applicants to come up with solutions, let's define to some extent what the village's intent or desire is, even though some of those cannot be envisioned because of lack of sewer in this village, but that would be resolved once basically the form is defined. The means to getting to that form would have to be addressed through septic, whether that's a municipal system or maybe private development that would undertake introduction of, we don't need central treatment plants anymore. These could be localized per block even. At some point we were even talking about connecting to the Southampton Hospital's treatment plant. But again, the implementation of this was not our mission. Our mission was to define the form and characteristic of it and set the...
Just ask one other question because I know other people want to talk. In the example you brought up in your remarks of the walkway to the historical center, was that, I don't know the answers, perhaps you recall, was that walkway not pre-existing? Was that created?
That walkway was a dirt alley.
There was
It
a
was a dirt alley.
dirt alley.
I remember walking by on numerous occasions, and actually, being an architect, I always like to look at things from not the normal perspective, not the shiny up front. I like to go walk in the back of the buildings and explore the back of the
Did any
buildings.
property owner have to be compensated or anything done or anybody incentivized to create that? Or did the village spend the money to do it, or how was that
Well,
created?
there were, I know that the restaurants usage, basically they do provide certain amenities, both for the Southampton Historical Museum, as far as, I can't get in, I don't know the details of it, but I know, for instance, they support annual funding of it, and also they have their events catered through the center.
If you let us do some stuff here, we'll expand the alleyway and take care of it.
Correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions, Jane or Pam? Thank you. Sorry to have you go on so long. Okay, Madam?
Good evening. I'm sure you've all read the story about...
For the record, I think they...
Oh, sorry, Evelyn Conrad. I'm an attorney here
Again,
and in the
yes,
city.
Thank you very much.
The story about the work session that you had. I was also sitting there, and a couple of things came up. Some of them are what Mr. Flanagan said also. They deserve to be mentioned. I think, Roy, you said you sympathized with the people who wanted to keep the courtyard, but it's private property, and therefore the developer could do what he wanted to. And
believe I said
Mr.
that
Robinson
exactly,
was
Ms.
sitting
Conrad.
opposite you.
I don't believe I said that exactly.
I'm
I
paraphrasing.
said I agreed completely with the people about the desirability of the open courtyard. I was just wondering whether the
Private
SECRA rules trump the private owner's right. I don't know the answer to that question. I did not state that it did.
No. Well, you didn't have an answer from Mr. Robinson either. Then let me clarify that. In secret terms, the open space is defined by its use, not by its ownership. And this open space, the courtyard, is used by one and all, and quite well used. Then you, Mr. McFarland, you also mentioned something, sitting over there. You said that as long as the developer is not violating the village code, he could do what he wanted. Was that roughly what you were saying?
No.
It's what I heard.
No, I said if he violates the village code, there'll be other boards that will deal with it, such as the ZBA and so forth. You have to
I didn't hear
have
you mention the
approval. You have to have approval for what you're going to do. By the way, keep going. We're listening.
Yes, but what you were basically
We're happy
saying
to
is
listen to
that-
your argument.
Oh.
Yes. give
Well,
us-
it's not an argument. You were basically saying that the village code, if it was not violated, then the developer could go ahead. And again, Mr. Robinson did not correct you in the least. And then I believe the two women on the board were a little upset about the length of the discussion, and at that point you all agreed that you would end the open hearings at the end of this meeting tonight. Did you not hear that as well? If that's what you agreed to, I hate to tell you, but that is what the law would call a conspiracy to violate the New York State environmental law. Now,
Thank you for your
seem to think-
assertion. We will deal with that
I'm
if you
not
make
finished.
it.
I beg your pardon?
We will deal with that if you want to make it formally. Please go ahead. I understand your argument.
Definitely formal, because you would also be depriving the village, defrauding the village, in effect, of an amenity that it likes and enjoys very much, and depriving the shopkeepers on Job's Lane from a tourist attraction and the shopping attraction. So I would be somewhat careful. I'm surprised that your lawyer did not caution you about that. I'll
Thank you.
caution you about that.
Well, I guess if you were our counsel, you would cautious on every phrase.
wouldn't
Thank you
have
for
gotten
your
this far.
views. I understand that it's a widely used courtyard in your view. I'm sure people, everyone here will raise their hand that they've been in it at least recently. I'd love to see anyone who's been in that courtyard last year or often, okay? That's what the village is all about. The village trustees will listen to all that and give us the rules that we're supposed to enforce. We know that. And if we cancel the hearing, madam, it won't be because of your arguments that our counsel's ineffective.
I beg your pardon.
Won't be because you're telling us our counsel is ineffective and warning us. If we cancel the hearing, it's because we've heard a lot of people, and we're getting a view of what the village code either says or the trustees have said. So thank you.
Excuse me, but
Thank
the
you.
hearing at which you voted and opened a negative declaration
That's right.
was inadequately noticed to people. It was noticed to about 4 or 5 entities and not to the entire street, so it could be challenged on that basis.
I
Besides,
understand.
at the
It was noticed to us by an applicant after a
well, you
year
have a
of...
chance to say
Madam,
it's inadequate.
we heard about this after a year of the plan represented by councilmen going forward without anyone coming in with any comments. And when Ms. Madonia, who many of us know, who's a wonderful lady, came in and said she wanted to do something, we did exactly what she asked as a neighbor. And we did it immediately.
Who are you
And
talking about now?
Excuse me?
The Madonians? They didn't even know about it until
Well,
quite
that-
recently.
But that may be. But they came in saying they hadn't heard, even though there have been notices published consistently for at least 7 months, I believe, before they came.
Really?
Yes, I went to the file.
It said that that
Yes,
courtyard
ma'am.
was to be changed
Yes, ma'am.
to a redevelopment?
Yes, ma'am.
Really?
And a pre-application started a year ago at the beginning of this past June.
And that was in
now-
your official
Yes, ma'am.
paper?
And we're now finding out, and we're happy to get into it. And if it continues, of course we will. So I understand your argument. Thank you very much. But I'm just saying, some of the facts you wish to represent may not be in the mind of a lot of the people.
Well,
So thank you.
at the last hearing, I brought up the fact that you
Thank you.
should rescind the negative declaration, and you haven't done anything about that either. You should address it.
We listened happily to your argument. Thank you. Excuse me. Who else anyone please would like to speak? Ma'am?
My name is Kim White, and I come wearing 2 hats. One, because I'm the chairman of the board of Beconic Baykeeper, which is fighting an uphill battle to protect our waters from further pollution. A lot of that pollution is because of massive overdevelopment. I'm also here to speak as a concerned citizen and one who's been coming to Southampton for 40-odd years. I love it out here, as does everybody else in this audience. I have watched in dismay and horror at many things that have gone on with development, with encroachment on wetlands, and now, as a citizen, I watch in dismay as you want to erase, or this developer, the retail, who wants to build this retail mall, wants to erase a beautiful part of the village, which is that courtyard. And yes, I am one of those people who often will go in and say, how wonderful. And I think that the preservation of the village and the character is why most people are out here. It is what draws us here. And the more it slips away, the more horrible it will become as property owners. The village should belong to the people, and the people who pay taxes and are property owners, not outside developers. And you should ask yourself, does this village really need more retail space?
Okay.
I mean, God almighty, there are tons of empty storefronts. And with Amazon, it's going to become more pronounced.
Exactly.
You know, I get on the phone, I get things overnight.
We agree the times change, and that's
Right,
why the
but-
planning needs to be done.
Right, but the planning and someone who wants to cover that courtyard up and to take away a piece of beauty on Job's Lane in the village should be a big part of your decision, not just the law, if you can obviously do things to prevent it and get good legal counsel, but for people like all of us who want to protect the integrity and the beauty and try to do something to not further damage the environment.
Well, I'm with
Thank
you,
you.
but do me a favor, us a favor, everyone. It seems to me all of us who have this different issue, different views of retail and the space and Amazon and the internet and all the stuff we're dealing with and what the future might be. You've got to have a plan, as Simi just said, and thank goodness he came. It goes to the village trustees, it becomes the plan that everyone follows, because unfortunately, we still have in this country, the act of government has to say it applies to everybody, so tell the village, write the village. We're called the planning board. I've told them twice to change our name. We don't plan. We have to deal with the plans they give us for the village, what has to do with space, parking, there's a long list of
And what's
stuff.
more,
Interior circulation, all
and to
the
your
stuff.
point, and I have tried, and I think have many, but
talk to the
what's wrong with
trustees.
more open space?
Well, tell them.
Why does everything have to be corrupted?
Send them a letter. We've told them many times, but we've told them why more banks. We can give you lots of questions, but please do. It's a very nice comment. But take it to that arena. It'd be wonderful.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eaton,
I have a question that I don't really answer.
please state your name for the record.
Fred Eaton.
Fred Eaton, thank you for the recording. You're being recorded.
I can't hear you. I couldn't hear
You're
you.
being recorded.
Good. I can read what you said later. So nobody can hear a word you're saying.
Okay.
My only question is, in other urban societies, when buildings are empty, which you referred to, they're often empty because the rent's too high, and the developers want to develop it into a better and more profitable situation. So I'm not sure the argument that the stores are empty is cogent.
Okay, thank you. Council, Mr. Bregman, please come forward. Thank you, sir.
I'm Bragg.
Trustee Bregman, excuse me.
Thank you. A few comments here. Mr. Chairman and board members, thank you for the time. I have to respectfully disagree with the chair. Not a good way to begin discussion.
That's fine.
To say you are the planning board and you are engaged in planning. That's your job. And there's a statute that tells you how to apply your discretion in reviewing site plans. And I'll get to that in a minute, but I wanted to start with another law that controls what you do here, that makes it very clear that just because someone comes in with something that complies with zoning doesn't mean he gets that, and you can't examine it, you can't change it because it complies with zoning. First of all, let's remember this plan does not comply with zoning. They're asking for variances in depth. They're planning to build this building out virtually to the lot line, about 6 inches away from my client's property. My client is Sue Madonia. And because you're in the historic district, it's a type 1 action. Whether or not this property is contributing, I want to discuss that a little bit. Nonetheless, under the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act, you are required to examine whether the plan that's in front of you creates any kind of a material conflict with community plans and goals that are officially adopted.
All right.
That means your comprehensive plan and some of the other planning documents that I brought with you today. You must examine whether this contradicts those plans, and it does. In addition, you are required to look at whether the plan, even if it complies completely with zoning, which it does not, will impair the character or quality of important historical, architectural, aesthetic resources, or resources of existing community and neighborhood character. So it doesn't have to be a historic building. It merely has to be an aesthetic resource or a resource that establishes community character. And I don't think there's anyone who can deny that this plaza does exactly that. And you are also obligated under the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act to examine the significance of likely consequences on those categories that you're required to examine. And impacts don't have to be, a hammer striking a wall. An impact is anything that damages or degrades one of these aesthetic or neighborhood character resources. And that's why you have a room full of people here tonight. Because everybody in this room knows something that some lawyers don't know, and maybe sometimes, board members don't know, and that is that when you have lived with an open, gracious plaza that's there for a reason, that has a historic background for why it's there, and somebody comes in with a plan to build wall-to-wall up to the sidewalk, Everybody, you don't need a law degree to know that you are devastating a significant aesthetic and neighborhood resource that is intrinsic to the character of Job's Lane and the character of Southampton Village, and a part of what makes people want to shop and want to come here. And I told you the last time I was here that, having worked as a councilman in another jurisdiction, I know how hard it is to generate walkability. Walkability is the key feature that modern planning wants to inject into locations, because that's what makes people want to spend time there rather than drive through like it's County Road 39. And it's very hard to recreate these kinds of amenities when they are lost. So I want to remind you tonight, politely and respectfully, that it is your job as the planning board to consider these architectural and aesthetic resources of existing community and neighborhood character, and to examine whether there's going to be a significant impact on them. And the answer is clear. It's going to be destroyed. It's going to be destroyed. The second thing is, we are here under site plan review requirements, and those requirements also themselves explicitly state that your job requires you to look at the nature of development and ensure that it's at a scale and density consistent with existing development and with the master plan of the Village of Southampton. So in answer to your question, or it may have been another board member's question, does the comprehensive plan have any teeth? The answer is absolutely it does, and it's in your site plan standards that you have to look at. And again, I would suggest to you that a plan that builds wall to wall, front to back, needs variances, needs parking variances, is not development at a scale and density consistent with the existing development on this lot, nor is it consistent with many of the comments that are in your master plan of the Village of Southampton. Now, Mr. Samyak was telling you about some of those requirements or those concerns, and he did steal some of my thunder, because I went out and looked at the Southampton Village Center document.
Yep.
And he's correct when he says that I just want to get to that, preserving the unique historic fabric and building new like old is a requirement that is in your comprehensive plan, and therefore something that you can and must consider when you evaluate this site plan. And he's correct when he said that your comprehensive plan emphasizes the necessity to maximize walkability throughout. And when he raised the issue, which the applicant was very dismissive about having access to the rear parking, where they want a variance. Don't forget, they want this building, they want it to be too deep, and they lack the parking that they need. And that is a fact that you can take into account when you look at these criteria that you are supposed to apply. And one of them is connecting walkability to parking. And there is a perfectly logical argument to make that when you're going to build wall-to-wall building, dramatically changing the function of that plaza right at the property line, yeah, they should, maybe what they should do is make that building smaller so they don't need to ask for a variance. Bring it back, they'll get more parking, and you, as a planning board, can require them to establish a walkable connection between the front of that property and the parking behind it. And that's why you are on the planning board. You do have the authority and the mandate to make sure that when an applicant brings in a plan, that you shape it and control it so that you fulfill the requirements in your comprehensive planning. I think there's an argument also to be made that this affects stormwater handling, because right now they're replacing a brick patio with nothing but building. And I think a logical argument could be smaller building, Setback further is going to have more natural recharge, less need for dry wells, less runoff. That is something that you should consider, and it's a valid reason for saying to this applicant, as you can, your building should be smaller. And you could say to this applicant, and you have every right to say it, you know, we've enjoyed this plaza for over 50 years. This is what makes Job's Lane the desirable shopping area that it is. We want to see you pull the facade of that building back to preserve some of what that plaza does, because it fulfills our comprehensive planning. And by the way, it is true the buildings are not historic and they were built in the 70s. But here's what this space in the block does and why it's there. It's there because there was a historic house for years in the middle of that plaza where the fountain is, okay? So, and the space itself tells you something about the historic district. The fact that that space is there makes people ask in a very good way, gee, how are they so lucky to have a plaza like that, where you can walk and sit down and have coffee? Well, the answer is that's because it shows how Job's Lane developed historically. So yes, the buildings are not significant historically, but the space is. It means something to the village. These standards, these policies are also enumerated elsewhere in the Village of Southampton comprehensive plan, which I was just running through very quickly before I got here, and there are just many references to establishing greater efficiency for parking and walking. It seems to be a value that pops up in many different sections where you state your planning goals. One is that the community feels that it's hard now to sustain neighborliness and civic mindedness that make a village a hometown. Well, my suggestion to you as a planning board is that one of the things that makes this Job's Lane so special and this part of Job's Lane so special is that plaza does exactly that. It sustains neighborliness, and it suggests civic-mindedness, more civic-mindedness than this application demonstrates. This wall-to-wall application, this front-to-back application, this application 6 inches from my client's property that blocks her second-story windows. And the answer is no. He doesn't have an absolute right to build that. That's why we have planning boards, so that you can inject the values of the community in compliance with your statute, in compliance with SECRA, and in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Improve pedestrian amenities to include open space, sidewalks, crosswalks, etc. Improve pedestrian amenities. That's what this plaza is. It is a pedestrian amenity, and you have an obligation to protect it. And there is a way that you can protect it by saying to this applicant, your project's too big, it violates community character, it's going to create a significant adverse environmental impact on a significant cultural resource, it suggests the historic development of the village even without having a historic building there. And long-term planning goals, page 53 of your comprehensive plan. To preserve and enhance the village's quality of life elements, including open space, development and land utilization must fit within the existing pattern of development. That doesn't mean you look at the biggest building on the street. It means you look at the lot and look at the pattern of how it developed. And it developed with this wonderful amenity that we in other towns labor hard to try to recreate after the fact so that people don't drive through the community of Wainscott. You know what we need in Wainscott? We need a plaza like you have on Job's Lane, and many other communities do. That's what makes Job's Lane special. And to just, write it off as if there's nothing that can be done. We're not a planning board. There's, we're stuck. You are not stuck. This is where the rubber hits the road in front of this board. This is where it happens, and I urge you to carefully focus on this and question this applicant and say, hey, can't that building be moved back from that front yard setback so that we don't have one wall of shopping up and down Job's Lane, which people do not like. People shop better when they can sit down, have a cup of coffee, and relax. You're allowed to ask those questions. You should ask those questions. So I think I've said before, I think that the fact that you issued a negative declaration before you even heard from my client, Sue Madonia, you still haven't really heard from her. I brought some pictures in with me. They're not as good as I hope to have at this point, and I don't want to waste time trying to find them, but I have them here. And there are other problems with her building that she'd like to present evidence on. I went into the building and looked at the foundation with her. And, the plan here is to build, it looks like really virtually on top of her building. It looked to me about like 6 inches away. Council can correct me if I'm wrong. And this building has an old brickwork foundation. So it's a delicate building, and this construction, it has potential impacts on her. And what I'm asking you for is some more time to be able to bring in an engineer's letter so that you can examine these issues. You don't just, say, okay, it's done deal, they meet zoning, which they don't, and there's nothing we can do. We're asking you to take the time to examine these factual issues and get some more information. We'd like to give you more information about what's going on with her building. But to just write off this plaza is an egregious act. I don't know how many of you know the Home Goods store in Waynescott, big store, built right on the sidewalk, wall-to-wall store. This is going to be your Home Goods store. It's not as big. I'm not saying it's as big. I'm saying it's as damaging to the site. And you don't want to be the planning board that goes down in history as having given away this plaza and dramatically changed Job's Lane. That is not the legacy that you should have. I have petitions here, and they are general petitions that say that we oppose the proposed demolition and reconstruction as it is. And I'm going to hand them in. I think there are about 350. She has more of them online. That doesn't mean, when 350 people give you a signature on a piece of paper, it's not meaningless. People are upset about this because they see it as damaging the fabric of the village of Southampton. And that's why they're here tonight. Maybe not all of them have spoken tonight, but that's why they're here tonight. Now, I also wanted to mention to you briefly, I brought a friend and an expert on matters of handicap access, and I want to have him come up and talk to you because we're concerned about the design of the building and whether it meets ADA, whether it is ADA compliant and provides appropriate access. His name is Glenn Hall. Glenn is someone I've met since becoming a council person. He is a longtime activist for really the civil rights of handicapped people, and I would ask him to come up and...
Can I ask you a quick question first about what you just talked about? I think you've made great points. You've well thought out, well researched, and I struggle with the issue greatly because I have one question. Just help me out with it. What requires the landowner to fund a park for the public?
I would answer that by saying that you can't just seize property and turn it into a park for the public without paying the owner what he paid for the land. But as a planning board, you are permitted and authorized to impose conditions that are reasonably related to the policies and the statutes that control your review. And what I've tried to do in the last 10 minutes or so is to enumerate some policies and statutes that are incorporated in your long-range planning for the village and that are also mentioned in your site plan statute. And actually, I should say a little bit more about that because Your site plan statute itself says development has to be at a scale and density consistent with existing development. I would suggest that this is not, because it's completely demolishing a plaza. And I think under those circumstances, the planning board has the power to say to an applicant, we're not going to let you completely take away that amenity. You have to redesign this building to preserve this aspect of the neighborhood character. And then you can debate about how much is enough and how much is too much. And similarly, you're supposed to give, under your site plan rules, due regard to cultural features. So it's not limited to just the big fancy historic buildings, it's the cultural features that give this village, the atmosphere and the look that people love to enjoy. And you can say to this applicant, because it's reasonably related to this standard, when you build a building that comes all the way to the front line of the property and all the way to the sidelines of the property and eliminate a plaza that's been there for 50 or 60 years,
42, I believe, if I did the math right. I just wanted to clarify that only because I have lived here for most of my life.
Okay, 42 years, okay? I'm fine with that. It's still a cultural feature that is a character-defining feature of the village of Southampton, and you're entitled as a board to impose conditions that are reasonably related to ensure that this application pays due regard to that cultural feature that's been here for 42 years. You can do that, and you should do that. And you also are authorized to examine whether the facade is consistent with the neighboring facades. And again, I think if you fold this into an examination of what this contributes to the look and feel of the neighborhood, you can impose reasonable conditions.
I think, Mr. Bragman, if I may say, the biggest quandary is that the public does not realize we cannot put a restaurant back there.
You don't have to have a restaurant?
But what's back there? There's nothing back there to bring people to walk there.
This site is going to be completely redeveloped.
I'm saying that I think that just the public should know what can and can't be built there. A restaurant can't be put back there.
We're not arguing over a restaurant. We're not arguing over any...
Well, I read a number of letters. There were 9 letters that came in. And that seemed to be the gist of what many of the people were suggesting. I would agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, a restaurant would be great back there.
I'm not sure why a restaurant can't go there since there are 2 other restaurants on the block. There are lesser impacting uses like a coffee
Please
shop.
represent a restaurant owner and put one in then, please. It would be lovely.
Well, you know what? I think you're going to have more luck getting a restaurant in there if you preserve some or all of the plaza. It's necessary to do.
That's a technical argument. The code, we have a village code that the trustees of the village have adopted. Yes, it has a feature that says cultural features. You've read it and I've read it. And it says, due regard shall be paid to all cultural features and adjacent to the site, including but not limited to archaeological and paleontological remains, old trails, historic buildings, and sites in agricultural fields. Well, that's a great, this plan is not written, hey, you want open spaces. We're aware from what Simi's been through, there's, in terms of the phrases you use elegantly, and I commend you, sir, walkability and all that, there's a lot of literature that I believe the trustees have reflected carefully, and this was not done over a year or 2. And there are many people who worked on it from the Southampton Association. I remember when they did it, I went to the hearings accidentally. It has nothing to do with this planning board. It's very important stuff as to how people collect and why. Who goes shopping? Who goes shopping on the internet? Who just goes to go to a restaurant? Who goes to other than, say, Silver's and to get a cup of coffee? I mean, a village fabric is something the trustees think about and have done. And I hope you'll go to them and tell them, we think arcades or this is not an arcade. This is a store that fits, believe it or not, the plan that was done talks about the number of feet involved in a front that's unbroken, and it was part of the submission that we agonized with over giving our neg deck and all the stuff that people complain. The neg deck's another avenue for getting at other issues. We've tried to deal with all the stuff that's in the plan that comes this way for the specifications.
But you can shape the plan.
No, we don't shape the plan. We have a plan that, as the building commission, board, we have to review the site. And here's something that fits a lot of features of the plan, and we have to weigh them. But don't say this is all black and none of it's there, because it meets a lot of the stuff that's there. The phrase, I read it earlier to everybody before you got up, sir. Thank you. We have to meet the existing development and master plan. That's what, if it needs to change for modern times and stuff, everyone will be responsible to it, including the merchants who pay money, as my friend Mr. Eaton said. Everybody wants a return. I guess people want to build a house to sell it. People want to live there forever and give it to their children. There are lots of reasons. They're not for us. We set up plans for everybody to meet the existing, it says existing development and master plan. So let's get to the trustees and tell them something could be improved, if it could. Let's do it.
But your own statute, your site plan review statute tells you that you are obligated to examine the recommendations in your comprehensive planning, and your comprehensive planning is replete with references that tell you how important this plaza is, and you are the board responsible to shape this application, not the trustees.
I understand your argument, and when we do it, we have standards that the trustees things give us, and that plan does not talk about plazas and places where people go just to stand around. It's not in there. Good plan, and I've done some research on this just because it's a real issue. And I'm one of the few people here that goes often into that building next to it. I did it for Caldwell Alexander for years, and I do it for the Madonias. It's a wonderful shop. I know all about it.
It's a cultural feature.
Let me finish. I understand.
It's a cultural feature.
We know all about it, okay? We have to weigh the fact that they think walkability, which you talked about, walkability apparently is a very examined municipal concept. How people collect has to do with storefronts, the lack of things to go in. Simi said they studied it. He had the numbers wrong. I've realized they said the maximum penetration for a facade should be no more than 12 feet as a walkway into something. I mean,
your site plan standards also talk about walkability to access parking. There should be front to back access to get parking.
And we know, we were told, we see right next to this is a through the block, I'll call it walkway, to that back parking. Maybe we need another one. Let's get a study that says we need more access to that back lot.
That's one of the standards for your site plan review of this lot.
And we considered it carefully, because a few feet away is this, by the way, this lot does not go through.
I've walked through it.
You've got to go through and take a turn into the backyard behind your client.
You make a slight turn, but you can get to the
There's a little
parking.
brick sideway step into the backyard of your client to get there. But maybe it should go all the way through. But that's what the village trustees need to tell for everybody.
That's what the planning board needs to tell the applicant.
Tell the board, tell the planning commission. If you read the statute, the planning commission of this village meets regularly. I think some people are here who are members. Simi was. Tell the planning commission. That's their job. Our law, under the state law, does not make us the planning commission. I've read the state law 5 times this month. We are excluded from what other planning commissions do in other counties and in other towns. I guess it was set up in 1927 and done differently. Go to the planning commission. That's what you do.
Mr. Chairman, you are the planning board. You have the authority and the mandate to act in this case, and if you don't, it is a serious failure that everyone in this village will regret.
Thank you. Thank you for your allegation.
My handicap expert.
ADA issues. ADA issue.
Hello. My name is Glenn Hall.
Glenn Hall, thank you.
I am chairman of the East End Disabilities Group, a not-for-profit organization created about 25 years ago to represent the disabled on Eastern Long Island. It's been a long time since I've been in Southampton Village. I was here back in around 94 or something like that, and was recommending to the village that they should start complying with the American with Disabilities Act. It's been a long time since the American Disabilities Act was enacted. Came into effect in 1992. It was signed in 1990. It is civil rights for the disabled. And I would remind you that the disabled are not those people. The disabled are our friends, our family, and every one of us will eventually become disabled. So what we do by applying the American Disabilities Act is we are taking care of ourselves and the people we love. 28 years it's been going on. 25 years I've been fighting this fight. Just because we have a law, just because we have the American Disabilities Act, does not mean it's enacted, does not mean it's enforced. In fact, I just came off a month of dealing with East Hampton Town Planning Board and dealing with a property in Montauk that was being put up in violation of the American Disabilities Act. And because the planning board had not gone into the concepts of the American Disabilities Act and the law in the very beginning, where you are right now with this project, because they had not demanded the American Disabilities Act being looked at and adhered to, they found themselves near the end of the project, and the building was in abject non-compliance with the American with Disabilities Act, and it's causing all kinds of problems. So I am here to ask you, who here has read the American Disabilities Act recently when it comes to this specific building? Which one of you is in charge of making sure that the American with Disabilities Act is now in this plan and is being adhered to?
I have not read it recently on this project. I have read it within the past month on another project, so
Okay.
I will tell you a slightly above general understanding of it. We have talked to our advisor here at Nelson Pope and Voorhees. We have still monitoring the compliance of this project with the ADA restrictions. They either are about to meet them or have just met them, where they go to the, Kathy, which group is it?
So it's the village engineer has been reviewing the plans for compatibility with the ADA requirements. There is one aspect that hasn't complied, which was the 60% of all accesses
Right.
have to be ADA accessible.
Right.
And so that's something that the applicant is working through, but that's an outstanding comment. They have submitted plans preliminarily that show additional access points that would meet that requirement.
How many doors do they have? How many entrances
Oh, I
do
don't
they have?
remember. It's,
I think it's 3. Well,
no, there's
we
there's
need
3 in the
3.
front, and I think there's 6 in the back. Is that correct, Gil?
I think we need, there's been study of the
can't
number
remember,
we need
sorry.
relative to the doors, and we can.
But we did note that they're didn't meet the 60%.
Council, do you have the number at hand?
Okay, and
You have that
all of the
number at
front
hand?
entrances
No,
comply
they
with
don't.
ADA?
They don't.
No. And will they not be complying with
That's
ADA?
correct. That's correct.
That is in an absolute
It's in- it's
conflict
not in the
with
spirit.
ADA.
It's not in the spirit of-
it's in conflict. And do you know what statute I'm referring to?
I don't have the number, but
Well-
it's in my engineer's memo.
I have it right here for you if you'd like it.
I'm sure it's in the file.
Okay, well, let me read it.
Okay.
It is section 206.3, location. Accessible routes shall coincide with or be located in the same area as general circulation paths. That means the front door. You cannot allow this building to go up without accessibility through the front doors off the streets. This is not only federal law, this is New York State Code. You'd like me to read you New York State Code? Yes, because New York State has the same thing written in it.
I believe we're applying with all this stuff as to what those requirements are for access to the shops in the front and the back.
Right, but this has to do with, this is the front of the building.
I understand.
This is
I
the
said-
sidewalk of the building,
This is-
and the law says that this building must have access, equal access for disabled people from the sidewalk on the front through the building.
I believe we understand that. In fact,
Right, and so
I
are
think
you going to make sure this building does that?
You should go there with council. I'm not sure even this courtyard does. So this is a difficult area off Job's Lane, but this has
I
been
can't
studied.
hear you, I'm sorry.
This is a
Another thing is you don't have-
This is a difficult courtyard, even off of Job's Lane. I'll bet you find if you go over, it might not be ADA compliant even as a
That's not the
courtyard.
issue at hand. The issue
No,
at
no,
hand is
no, no.
whether or not you
We're aware-
allow this building to be built, and you do it without in compliance with the American Disabilities Act and New York State Municipal Code.
And we have made and are continuing to make it as a condition. It has not been approved yet because that matter on this application has not been done satisfactorily under those regulations. That's where it stands.
Will you promise and guarantee the public right now that you will not allow this building to be built unless it has full ADA access through the front door as compliant with law?
It will not be built if it violates any laws that pertain to our decision, sir.
Okay. I would
We know
also
that.
ask you what's going
That's what
on
we
with
do.
the gravel walkway in the back.
That's what we try to do.
Is there full ADA access through
I'm
the
not
back also?
There are 3 ADA accessible doorways in the
Right.
back, yeah.
But I heard that, I believe somewhere that you said you're going to have a permeable surface in the back there so that the
It's
water will
not
drain?
gravel, it's not gravel though.
But is it
It's-
ADA compliant?
It's pervious pavement, it's not.
But is it ADA compliant?
compatible. Our engineer has looked at this. The village
Right, but
engineer has
again,
looked at
what
It
I'm
is
saying
something
is-
that we've asked them to study, sir.
Right, but
All I
what
can
I'm
tell you.
saying is that in my experience, groups like, boards like yours have, because they have not said that ADA must be perfectly adhered to in this stage of the process, that it gets lost in the end and then it gets messed up and the rights of the disabled people are taken away from them. So therefore, I am asking you to comply with the law, and before you go any further on this project, you make sure that they are in pure compliance with the American with Disabilities Act and New York State Municipal Code. I have handouts here for you which are copied out of state and federal code
Thank you.
for you to read.
Thank you.
It's very clear. If you want me to come back, I will come back with precedent. If you want to know, can you fudge this stuff? No, you can't. If you want East End Disabilities Group to get involved on a federal level, that is what we do. We will take this to federal court because you must comply with federal law and state law, but specifically federal law. And I have no problem taking this to federal court if that's what you want. Because I've already spoken to DOJ about this type of thing, because this is almost exactly the same thing that I just went through for a month in East Hampton. So I am very sure of my ground, my footing here, and if whatever you want here, it's for me to be able to prove to you that you must do this. You don't have an option. You must do this. And I ask you, for all disabled people and for your friends, your neighbors, and all of you probably someday too, this is what it should be. This is what the rights of everybody are, and please adhere to it so we don't have to go any further and get ourselves in more of a mess than anybody's in anyways.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. Here are...
We were given a presentation by the architect, and I saw specifically that they had accommodations for the handicapped. The reason why I remember that so well is I spent 30 years as a special ed teacher, so that's a concern of mine. And Gil, I don't know if you can speak to that right now, but I believe it was your colleague who brought up how that was being surfaced in the front so that it was handicapped accessible.
I reserve the right to come back to the
Thank you.
legislation. I don't want to speak off it.
Okay, thank you, Gil.
And sir, my mother was handicapped, so I appreciate your efforts on behalf of the disabled. Such a tremendously important issue. I am not an expert on the ADA, and I would never think that I could become one in a short period of time, but I depend on our consultants and their engineers and their analysis to provide us with adequate and expert opinion as to whether the plans satisfy all the requirements of the ADA. And I guarantee you that as a board member, I would never attempt to look at any plan that sought to fudge or not comply with those regulations. So appreciate your concern and your comments, and I pledge on my behalf that we would take a close look at all aspects of that.
Thank you, Roy.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. Madeline Van John, representing
And you're with the Southampton Association again? Nice to have you back. Thank you.
So I don't want to repeat anything that's already been said, but I do have to say I'm a little dumbfounded by what's been said here. The fact that I've appeared before many planning boards, and I've never heard a planning board say that they don't have the authority to direct the direction of a site plan before them. That's kind of your entire purpose. If you had no authority to change a site plan that appears before you, it would just go through the building department, the building inspectors would check the numbers, and they'd be on their way. The entire reason the applicant is here before you is for you to review the aspects of the site, as everyone else has gone into. And our main concern is that we'd like the applicant to be encouraged to try some alternative solutions, not necessarily a restaurant, not a different use, but a different configuration that preserves some open space, some pedestrian walkway. We're not saying that it has to remain exactly the way it is with no changes. We're just saying that you have the power as a board, as the planning board, to ask the applicant to provide some alternative options, or to tell them that, you know, this layout isn't working for the character of the neighborhood. Just because they came to you with the plan, you have the power to tell them that you'd like some modifications made to that. And we'd just like to see if they can come up with some alternative configuration, not necessarily an alternative use, but a different configuration. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, we have the ability to say no. Thank you. We obviously have the ability not to approve a site plan that comes. We know that. And we were in the business of approving one for which there was no opposition that had come from all the notices and the hearings for some period of time. And now that it has occurred, we've held these hearings. And it's not by any allegations reluctantly or over our dead body or with strange votes. There's no question about it, unless someone wishes to argue, I guess, to impeach us all or that we're not planning. We're happy to turn down something that doesn't meet the 5 areas that are left for the so-called planning board to act in, and we'll continue to do so. So I understand your view, but we can't, as a matter of jurisprudence, I believe, tell people what to do. We get to review what people propose to do, and if we turn them down, they'll have to come to something else, I guess, or sell it to the CPA or wherever that council thinks we should do, find another buyer. So the private market will take care of it if we turn them down. We know that. Anybody else wish to speak? Please do, if you'd like to. Sir?
My name is Gus Francesi, and I've been a property owner on Job's Lane for 37 years, both as a landlord and a merchant at times. I can only tell you what I know about this property, and I was personal friends with Herman Phillips, who developed the property, and he was very disappointed back in the mid-'80s with the performance of the property because we couldn't hold tenants in that property way back then. And I'd like to remind the board, that was before the internet, and it's always been a difficult property to fill, and before pop-up stores as well. Okay. Property hasn't been street level. I compare it to the courtyard across the street, which is street level, and has been much more successful in keeping tenants. And they're right across the street from each other. The property presently is in bad condition. I almost twisted my ankle once or twice last winter going in there. I don't see how this board can reasonably expect the applicant to keep the property as it is in poor condition when it is an obsolete property. The courtyard is beautiful. I like it myself, okay? But I question, and if it's such a treasure to the community, if it's so important to the community, why cannot we keep stores in there? And that's a fact. We've never been able to keep stores in there since it was built. The owner at the time expressed his disappointment with me, I would say about 1985, and was going to tear it down and do exactly what this applicant wanted to do, put stores just like is being proposed. And that was many years ago. I don't know the right answer what to do for the community at large is, okay? But I'll say this to you. denying this application isn't going to do the business community any favors, okay? Because the property has been obsolete basically since it was built. It's never been performing properly. And that's what I know about it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else like to give a comment about this matter? Counsel, do you wish to take the floor again for any reason?
Say a couple of things to clarify a couple of points. There were questions that were made. There was talk again tonight about the CPF, Community Preservation Fund. I can tell you that shortly after the meeting on August 6th, I approached Mary Wilson, who, as you know, is the director of the CPF, because my client had authorized me to reach out to see whether or not there might be any interest. And her initial response to me was that for a number of reasons, the CPF program typically does not look at commercial property, in large part because of what it does in removing those properties from the tax rolls. She also told me that she would see what she could find out and get back to me, and I've heard absolutely nothing. But I want the board to know, within a day or two of the meeting, I made that request, and my client authorized me to do that. There are just a couple of other things, and I think it was pointed out once already. Currently, there's no direct access from this property to the parking lot to the rear. You have to cross another property and take a circuitous route to reach the parking lot in the back. And a comment was also made about the rear of the stores being as good as the front of the stores. Well, if you look at the elevations, that's exactly what my client has tried to do, to make them as attractive as the front of the building. There was something else I wanted to mention. About runoff. Well, actually, if you've looked at the plans we've submitted, they've been designed to retain all runoff on the site. That, coupled with the improved sanitary systems, would be a net benefit over and above what's there now, because obviously that courtyard is largely responsible for runoff. I think that is about it. What I would like to see happen would be that this matter be closed but held open for written submissions to the next meeting, because I think that we know pretty much what the issues are, and that's what I would request you to do.
Thank you. Yep. Trustee.
I would ask you to keep the record open, because there are substantive issues. We want to look at, I want to see what's going on with the handicapped access. You don't have all the facts, and the public should have access when they bring back, hopefully, a handicap compliant plan.
Okay, so you would like, when the ADA review, which has been underway for some time, to do it properly according to the laws, federal, state, and local, you think we should keep it open to have that reviewed so that the concerned citizens can make sure the ADA is done properly?
Yeah, I think the public has the right to look it over, just as council has the right to look it over. We'd like to bring in engineering. We're working on getting you some engineering about our foundation and what's going on in that building as well, which I think would be helpful. But I don't think this is a case where the record is ready to be closed. My request is, the season is ending shortly, and if you look at all the laws that seem to apply that I've read patiently this month about keeping things open that have been going now for a year, et cetera, we need there's a series of standards in the state code and all as to what it is. So if it's for ADA and neighboring plumbing, the construction, these are valid construction, they're very issue. In fact, our code says that when we deal with things like this to plan a site, if a solution involves something for a neighbor, it's written in the code, we can stipulate as a condition of our approval, I think know it well, counsel, I don't have to remind you of the code, we can stipulate that it is a joint venture that we may stipulate has to be done to satisfy the desires of the neighbor. I think we understand that. All right, would you like to keep it open for another month?
I have no problem keeping it open. I just have to say I've only been on the board for a year, and I've never seen a crowd before. We've been talking about this for a very long time. I didn't have a problem with it because I don't go back there. Okay. And I know that it's not access because I ride my bike in the back of all those stores, and I know it's not accessible. I know where I can go through. I can actually cut through.
It's accessible.
Not with a bicycle, so it wouldn't be accessible. It wouldn't be handicap accessible, that's for sure. It's not with a bicycle. You can't get through with a bike.
Keep it open.
Those are other properties. No, that's on another piece of property. It's not on this property. So this property is
I just would encourage everybody to go take a look at this courtyard and
Open another one.
see the condition it's in.
All right. Okay.
I'm fine leaving it open.
All right. Will you make a motion, madam?
I make a motion to leave this matter open for discussion with the public.
Second?
In favor?
Okay.
Aye.
Okay. Where did my itinerary go? Got too many books up here.
The same thing she did.
Gentlemen and ladies, the next item on our agenda is tennis court application at 1 Cooper's Neck LLC at the corner of Cooper's Neck Lane. And I think we're waiting for comments, Kathy?
That's correct. We haven't received
So
anything.
we haven't received anything, so we really can't proceed on that. So I believe we will entertain a motion that this application be mutually adjourned to the next meeting.
Make a motion at the request of the applicant to adjourn Cooper's Neck LLC tennis court application.
I second.
I approve it.
I think the record should note whether or not the applicant's representative is present.
I don't think anyone's here from. Is anyone here for Cooper's Neck?
And I would ask you to
LLC?
rephrase the motion to say, in the absence of a representative of the applicant, the board adjourns the application to the next meeting.
Yeah, because I did it in the fact that we received no further information.
We
Okay.
have requested additional information from them, correct?
Yes,
So-
we requested it. It hasn't come back yet.
So I make a motion that in the absence of the applicant, in the absence of any communication from the applicant,
Yep.
we adjourn their application of Cooper's Neck LLC, 65 Cooper's Neck Lane, to the following meeting.
Okay. Second.
Yeah.
Seconded again, revised motion. I'm in favor.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. The next item is subdivision Cowles Associates. And
You have in the file a draft resolution approving the reapplication or the reapproval of the prior decision of September 2, 2014, upon the same terms and conditions that were stated in the original. An affirmative vote on the motion would be to approve the certification.
okay. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, were you able to resolve your questions about the issues that you had with the application?
I think I was sufficient. I've talked to council that the village sent me to in Albany, and I've determined that for my purposes, there are certain matters of zoning that are determined by the ZBA that, as council said, quote, run with the land, close quote, which is a property concept that applies to a lot of things, but not everything. I probably did not give them a full statement because I couldn't find the opinions from 13 and 14 to talk to them about. I knew there were some conditions that were imposed, and I was concerned as to why this matter had come up again. If they ran with the land, there should be no issues to present. But based on what he said, I believe that with the conditions that were imposed by the ZBA, okay, which deal with the separation of the lots, and dealt at one point with the fact, I believe it came before us because the lots, if not separated, were being used by one property owner, in effect a joint decision. Those conditions, which are now being reinstated, probably render moot reapplying on this, but since it has to come before us, which surprised me, not just the ZBA, since it does have to come before us, I believe the right reading of the law says we will confirm what they have done. It is their problem, not ours. So I will entertain a motion that
I
we
make a motion in the matter of the application of Cowles Associates to approve the decision as written.
second. I vote in favor.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where's the original?
And John Bennett, thank you for extensive work. You increased my
Original's in the
education.
file.
I read it. I read it with 30 seconds to go because I just got it this evening, but I will memorize it.
I gave it to you on Thursday, but
I wasn't,
had other things to do on
wasn't
Labor
useful
Week.
at the building department on Thursday.
Does anybody have a copy of that?
You got the original.
Thank you, Roy.
Now, here's
Thank you, Roy.
Alan, you were through the file, do you have the original?
I'm looking, I just have a copy. I have Alexis Moses. I'm looking for it. I don't see it other than what says copy yet at this point. It should be one we can sign.
It was right at the front. I put it in the file myself.
I know, but Alan took the file apart.
We got the file to look at the page.
Right in the front's only 2
Here
copies.
you go, original instrument.
There you go. Found.
Thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, the next item is adjourned, which is Beechwood Latch, which is pending zoning board of appeals, so we will not have a discussion of that. I believe that it's recommended, since it's been taken so long, that on the next application of John Danielson for 30 Stanford Place, we ought to take action to remove it from our...
I've written a letter to the applicant advising him that the board is desirous of dismissing the application from the agenda, asked him to communicate with the board whether he was moving forward or was not, and giving him until the October meeting to make that communication.
To the October meeting? Okay, thank you. The minutes will show that matter we will not discuss. It is adjourned by us and the applicant. And if he does something suitable in our view and in view of our council by the October meeting, which is on the 2nd or 1st, I believe it's Monday, October 1st, we will entertain that application. All right, the next item is Hampton's HTA at North Sea Road. This is I believe, the bank occupancy proposal at Bowden Square.
Yes.
So,
The
Madam,
applicant...
can you give us a briefing on where are we?
I can. The applicant submitted revised plans, but just a couple of the sheets, and the village engineer has asked that they submit the full set, and
Full set.
so that way they respond to all the comments at once. He doesn't want to do it piecemeal. So we sent a letter this afternoon from Gary Becker requesting that.
Okay.
So I don't know
For the
if
full plan review.
you received that, but...
Yes, I received a letter. We just submitted the sheets that changed. There were no changes
Yes.
on the other, so we'll
Okay.
All right.
I guess that he's looking for anything that is in response to any outstanding comments, so
Okay.
make sure everything's consistent. So-
All right. On
And suggestion that you mail them copies directly to him, so that'll help expedite his review.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm sorry, you got ahead of me, or I got ahead of you, or something or other.
So Kathy, in other words, it's kind of procedure review to get it done?
Yes, that Gary Becker is insisting on a full set, so that way he wants to make sure the plans are consistent before he
Right.
reviews
Okay.
pieces, yeah.
Just to summarize a couple of things, we have addressed the site distance issue with the egress onto Bowden Square so that it complies with the village, we believe it complies with the village engineer's requirements. And we have taken a look at the changes in the grade and so forth, what we have to do if North Sea Road is ever widened. And we have some additional information we want to give on that as to how much fill might have to be removed to accomplish that. So we'll have more information for you before the next meeting, hopefully before the work session.
Okay. Kathy, does that address all the issues you're aware of?
Yeah, that is.
All right, then I guess we mutually adjourn this to
We can mutually adjourn.
1st of October.
I make a motion at the request of the applicant to adjourn Hampton's HTA LLC to the October meeting.
Seconded.
All in favor? Aye.
All ayes.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay. Number 4 is, I guess, a review, Kathy, if it's the new submissions you were looking for have
I
come
haven't
with
seen
respect to
anything.
McDonald's. Nothing's happened?
I haven't seen anything come in from the applicant. Is anybody here?
Anybody from McDonald's here?
Yeah, so we're pending
Okay.
resubmission.
I guess we say that on
Having heard, I make a motion that having had no response from the applicant, we adjourn McDonald's USA LLC to the October meeting.
Seconded.
Aye.
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 Done, okay. The next item is Oliver and Alexis Moses at Pierpont Street, which was a flag lot decision that we reviewed.
And in the file is
I
a
believe we have something from Bo in the
resolution
file.
approving the submitted landscape and site plan for the enhanced landscaping. An affirmative vote on the motion will be to approve the submitted document, which was also approved by the Board of Architecture Review and Historic Preservation.
Make a motion to vote on the decision for Oliver and Alexis Moses.
To approve.
To approve it.
To approve.
Motion
The decision
to
for Oliver and Alexis Moses.
approve it. I'll second that motion.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we have that, one. We have the, Pam, you'll sign them all as the witness, right? You're the scrivener.
Yeah, I'm the scribbler.
Okay.
We don't have witnesses.
Pass it on? I give you one.
This is the thing you sent to,
You get, I have one.
We're going to talk about,
I need one of those copies for the applicant.
yeah, this is the thing you sent today that I got this afternoon, right? That I read this afternoon, right? Be good.
I don't think I have one of those.
Here you go, they're coming. I got one, they came this afternoon.
Yes. So the memo that I prepared pretty much just puts together our initial comments and recommendations for the applicant when they make their site plan application.
Okay.
So, Mr. Martin, just one thing to comment on is that I had originally stated that you should submit a 40AF, but I didn't understand the complexity of this project, so I would rather have a 40AF when you submit the site plan application.
We do have an application in.
It's an application for a pre-submission.
Okay.
So, I mean, the plans are not complete yet, so. So there are several comments that relate to zoning and items such as traffic access, interior circulation and parking, and the ability for the site to provide the adequate parking. Part of it is that understanding the uses and the nature of the uses and what's being used when.
Yep.
And how many people are, it's a different use. They are sharing the space.
Yep.
There's going to be a daytime use and a nighttime use, and so that just has to be documented well. There's comments about landscaping, that a landscaping plan should be provided as part of the package. A photometric plan to evaluate the lighting should be required. And then the drainage and sanitary, that they need to look at what would be required for sanitary, what's the design flow requirement for the proposed use as compared to what's permitted on the site, and as well as designing it to make sure that all the runoff can be maintained on site. So there's a number of other comments in here, but I just wanted to get these out there so that way that would help with your application.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you want to hear from us tonight, but I know you did have some questions on the interior use of the property, and one of the project principals, Ashley Heather, is here, who can describe how it's going to work. But just to remind you, this is the 630 Hampton Road property. It's on the corner of Hampton Road, Flying Point. It's in a highway business zoning district. It currently has a use from the Glennon Buick Cadillac as an automobile sales and repair operation. We're looking to convert that to 3 uses, one an office, the second a gym, the third a restaurant. Those uses have been vetted by the building department and approved. We discussed with them the uses. We're entitled to 1 use per 10,000 square feet. The property is over 60,000 square feet, so we're entitled to 6 different uses. They're going to be those 3. Zoning-wise, we do have some updated maps, but I think we'll hold on to those until you put those in a formal submission. But I just ask you to accommodate us and let Mr. Heather talk about the interior circulation and the idea of the shared office. We do have a site that is currently operating with it. We do have statistics, so we can tell you how many people are going to be in from real experience with this particular use. I just asked Mr. Heather to come up.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Hi.
Ashley John Heather.
Now, all we know is this thing has not happened before.
Has not happened before.
And this type of multiple use thing. So since we have to approve a non-residential site, we need you to make us smart, if you would, and the collaterals are all the obvious things, everything from maybe a lot of parking at the peak, ADA, second floor. So nice to have you here, and thank you. Make us smarter about it.
Great.
What are you doing?
So I moved here 3 years ago from New York City. I'm English, but I've lived here since 2001 in America. Married, 3 children, all at Southampton Elementary School. I'm an entrepreneur. Typically, technology and marketing is what I do for a living. I help advise clients on building things that aren't physical, but they're digital in manner. And when I moved here 3 years ago, I looked for other people like me out here. And people said, you won't find anybody. There's nobody like you out here. Whilst that might be identically true, that there's nobody 6 foot English and so forth, but it turns out there are many people out here who do roughly what I do. They do it from home, and they're working isolated from home. People use the phrase solopreneur. It means kind of an entrepreneur, but working by yourself. And what essentially the Spur is a place for those people to gather, to create a community and a networked place where they can work. They can work by themselves, they can work together with other people, they can meet, host meetings, host clients, they can improve themselves in a mental way by learning and educating about new things. The world that we live in changes very quickly, and so there's always new things, new technologies, new ways of working, new ways of doing things. So part of the Spur is about creating a place where people can learn about those new things on a regular basis. Hence we have various meeting pods and areas in the plans where people can get together and learn. And health and wellness is very important for at least my generation of how we think about how we live our lives, and why many people are attracted to the Hamptons as an area is a balance between that work and life balance that many seek. And so that's why we have a gym in the area for health and wellness, to make sure that our members and the people working in our space are able to keep themselves physically healthy as well as mentally healthy in approaching their life and what they're trying to do to create a living for themselves and their families. The concept is not new in the world or new in New York. It is new to Southampton. There are many places like this in New York City, dozens, not just 1 or 2, but dozens. And so I guess what I'm doing is essentially taking a concept that exists and works in somewhere else, because I believe it can exist and work here. And I think it addresses some of the key issues that the town, the village specifically has, which is migration of youth to the city. As soon as somebody who grows up here, like my kids, maybe when they graduate, the first thing they will want to do is move to New York City rather than staying here and being part of the community and working here. Things like this facility are very popular in New York City with younger people. It tends to be the new work style. It's called the gig economy. You might have read about it in the New York Times or online, where people aren't working 9 to 5 for an organization every day in the same way. They're using technology, their mobile phones, their laptops to produce content, to work for companies, but they're working with multiple people at the same time. It's not just one organization they work for. So this gig economy now has hundreds of thousands of people working sort of under that title. And they generally are under the age of 45 and generally work in spaces like the Spur in cities and other metro areas. I believe that it's important to sustain villages like the Hamptons, which I love as is now my home, to have these young people and create them a nice environment for them to work. We're not ageist at all in terms of our members. We have 120 members of our temporary space. We're in the Red Barn by Southampton train station. That was an abandoned building. We took it over, we renovated it, and it's become a vibrant community asset for people like me, entrepreneurs. We've had about 50 event meetings where we bring people together and we talk to them about how to learn to code, how to take Instagram photos. We have art shows and so forth.
When you use the word member, Could you fill us in? This is,
Sure.
This is, means if you're a member, you get sort of like a WeWorks office, or you're a member, you got to be a member to use the gym, or senior member to use the weight room. I mean,
That's
what
right.
does member mean?
Member means that you can essentially access the building and use the facilities. We want to make sure we're creating a space with what's like-minded individuals, people who want to be together, who want to work together, who are working on solving similar issues. And so it's not somewhere where the public can necessarily just walk in and go and start working. You can become a member relatively easily. It's just trying to kind of protect the fabric of the group. We're not like a golf club where you've got to wait 3 years and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's not what we're establishing.
Change the price. But will it be a technology affinity, or you like the lady or the man? I mean,
so we have 4 verticals.
We'll be asked what's going on.
Sure.
What's the flavor?
We have 4 verticals that we focus on that map to the Hamptons as a region. So the first is health and wellness. So people and businesses and entrepreneurs that are building things in the health and wellness space is the first one.
Industry.
Okay. Industry, 4 industries, health and wellness. Second one is food, drink, and hospitality. Obviously, we're a farming landscape. A lot of people are trying to invent and create new ways to feed and look after their families from a food and beverage point of view. The third is media and technology, because really media and technology is underlying all of this change and transformation. And the fourth is retail. So if you're building a product, a physical thing that you're looking to sell, a product. What we're trying not to be a hub for typical service industry in the sense of somebody selling their time. That's not what we're trying to create. Businesses that build things that can sort of grow into scalable businesses. Bringing an accountant in, no disrespect to accountants if there's any accountants here, or bringing in a real estate agent in, those aren't necessarily building businesses that are going to create tax revenue.
So the law firm won't go in to have a law firm there?
Unlikely.
Thank you. Just checking.
Whilst we love Foul Fritz to death.
Service versus principle. We'll be asked what's going on.
Yeah, they'll be invited in to meet.
To lease a space to be a member?
No. So there are tiered membership levels. So the first is just the basic membership, which allows you to come and join and come to our events and be part of the community. Just like any association, to be honest, Southampton Association maybe as an example, or other members organizations, the same thing.
Is that a couple of $100 or a couple of $1,000?
It's a couple of $100 a month. It includes free breakfast and gives you access to our events. So if you spend $10 at Starbucks every morning, it basically pays for itself. We have a 50% reduced fee for under 27s called youth members, so it's $100 a month if you're under 27. Again, we're trying to encourage younger members. That's the base level, and we have 120 of those currently in our temporary location.
So you walk in and somebody scans your badge and...
There's a self-service kiosk. We have a check-in hostess or host, and we have a self-service check-in. You check in, it pings 3 or 4 of our admin staff to let somebody know that they're there. It's already got a photo of them. It's very high, it's very sort of high-tech security. So we have a log of everybody who's been in, and for safety reasons and so forth. And so that's the basic membership. In our current location, we don't have physical offices. We don't have enough real estate space. We just really have one big communal room and a conference room. Obviously, in the new space, as you've seen, it has a whole series of closed office spaces with the idea that you can be a solopreneur and you just need to come and sit at a desk and work for a couple of hours, take a meeting, and then have a bite to eat and then leave. Or you might have a small team where you want to have a small office of 1 or 2 people, or you might have a slightly larger team. Maybe it's 3 or 4, 5, 6 people. By that stage, you're probably a mature company, and we would encourage, and indeed are doing partnerships with other office locations around to say, hey, now you can migrate to take this office space. Maybe you need 8, 10, 12 people. You're too big now for us. We're there to sort of incubate and start the youngest, newer things and help them grow, and then we can sort of hand them off to being established businesses into other office parks and areas out here in Southampton that have got maybe sort of larger facilities, or they need their own dedicated facility. The issue for a young company, and it fundamentally comes down to a very simple concept, which is no one wants to sign a 5-year lease. They don't know whether they're going to be 2 people in 2 years' time, 20 people in 2 years' time, 50 people in 2 years' time, because the industries that we're working on, these sort of product-centric industries, can grow and fail very quickly. It's not like an established business that kind of has a 5-year runway and it knows how it's going to be. So our job is to sort of be this flexible space that allows you to come in, build up and down very quickly until you kind of get established, and then you can go and take that 3-year, 5-year lease somewhere where you know what your headcount is going to be. And that's how in the city they're working. WeWork is, probably the most well-known of businesses. And so we've got an element of that WeWork. So the majority of our space is a members only. It's not trying to be snooty or established in that way, but it's people who are paying to be part of this community. The reality is we're new and we don't know how successful we'll be, and we've got some assumptions and we've seen it successful in other places. So we need to have flexibility to allow the general public to come into certain areas to allow us to figure out our business model. It may be a year from now, 2 years from now, that we don't need the general public to come in at all because we have enough life and vibrancy and members that it covers all of the things that we need. We do want a restaurant because we want to make sure people can eat on site and have access to that experience.
This is, I know nothing about restaurants, but this is internal food service versus being a restaurant to get everybody to come by for dinner.
What's
the flavor here?
So there's 2 areas. So on the ground floor we have, let's call it a food service canteen. Let's use the word canteen, to describe that, which is office workers and their guests, because many people who are members bring guests. You're able to bring 3 guests as a member to come and have this experience.
And then you pay extra for a big meeting?
If you rent a conference room, sure. Okay. Yeah, if you rent a conference room where you have it catered and so forth, sure, of course, right. you pay extra for that. But generally, people are working by themselves or they're coming with a guest or 2, they're having a meeting over coffee, over a croissant, over a salad, over some kind of food is obviously a social...
This is ground floor working food service.
Working food service, you walk up, probably self-service to some degree, maybe some support, but basically, canteen style. Along with that, up on the roof, we know that we need to create a destination that people are excited about with the Spur. And so having a restaurant that is an elevated dining experience, still principally for members, but not exclusively, because again, we want to allow everybody to come and join that experience, lawyers included, to come to the restaurant as part of the Spur and to see it and to experience it and to understand this new type of working concept and what's going on. And so that's why for the restaurant, we at least want the ability to have the general public coming, even if we don't actually allow that to happen, because we've built the business model and it works. So 500 members is what we're planning for this space. As I said, we have about 120 members of our current space. We'll be up to about 150 by the end of the month or so, and that'll be capacity. And we generally have about 10% of our members coming on a daily basis, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but about 10%. So if we've got 150 members, we've got 15 people on premises. If we have 500 members, we expect to have 50 people on premise. That's sort of the working math that we've seen. We've been operating since January, so we have about 7 months of operating.
24 hours a day?
Say that?
Are you open 24 hours a day?
We are not currently. We may, because we've got more security systems in the plans of the new building with swipe cards and cameras and all of that kind of stuff, we might open some of the areas. Certainly not food and beverage and so forth, but if somebody has rented a 14 by 14 office from us and they want to get access, they forgot their bag or they want to get in there, we will probably allow some access to get into some of the spaces with a identity card.
I think the restaurant is not that people are going to be working late at 8 o'clock and want to go eat something.
That's part of it too. Yeah, that's part of it too.
Go there and have dinner separate from your
client entertainment. Establishing it's a place where you want to bring a client and have a nice food experience. Health will very much be part of it. The restaurant that we're building, we have a specific concept in mind that we're looking to build out, which is different from other. We're not just going to be another steak or another Mediterranean restaurant, another Italian restaurant.
Will the management of the restaurant be by the Spur, or are you going to an outside group?
Yeah, it's a debate. I would like to keep it internally by the Spur if I can. We're not there yet quite in our decision making, and we've still got a few months ahead of us to make that decision. But there are options to work with some other local restaurateurs who we know well in the community to help us come in and make sure what we create is a great experience for our members and their guests. Did that give you an overview?
That's good. Very helpful. Any questions?
Any questions on that before we get into the actual paths around the building that we have marked out? We have some plans to share with you.
Well, yeah, we got a glimpse at plans recently. You know, you're putting a restaurant on top, you'll have a dumbwaiter, you'll have stairs in the gym. I think the gym's being built out back or something like that. The issues we will contend with primarily, I think, I'm just guessing, will be an estimate as vague as it is, because you have to be vague for parking. What's the search? It's a hot area for vehicles.
Oh, 100%, and we understand that, and we're increasing the parking considerably from what it is today.
Still up, but you're increasing the people. Not that many people went to Glen and Cadillac.
Right.
It's a hot area, so it's going to be of community concern, including to the neighbors.
Understood. Absolutely.
I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Well, the interior circulation, I mean, that intersection is such a nightmare that people are going to want to cut through your parking lot, and I don't know how you're going to deal with that.
Well, I mean, hopefully we're able to prevent that, but as part of the secret process, I did talk to Ms. Eisman about that, and obviously traffic will be one of the secret issues that we have to look at, and then the interior circulation as a part of the traffic analysis.
And then my other concern just would be the undefined nature of the restaurant and being open late, and if the building's open 24 hours and now you have the restaurant open very late because it's not really a restaurant, it becomes a nightclub, and I'm concerned about
It's not going to be a nightclub. Let me allay that fear right now. If you want any covenant that says that, we'll do it. We'll agree to a reasonable closing hour of the restaurant itself, and it's going to be nothing but a restaurant. That's the intent here. This isn't a plan to build a nightclub. We were told pretty decisively by the building department. We dealt with that issue, so we're clear and we're happy that it'll be a restaurant. And the other thing that I'd like to make clear is the cafeteria is just for the members. That's not for the public to come in.
The ground
restaurant.
floor.
What?
This is the ground floor.
Right. Right.
I see we got ground floor eating and second story eating.
Think of it as a cafeteria.
I'm with you. No.
And then there's separate area as a restaurant.
Okay.
Right? So the cafeteria is accessory to the office use, is how we've discussed that and worked that out with the building department.
Well, Kathy's going to run through mechanically with the advisors to our advisor and everything else. We're going to go through all the, you've done this.
We have the memo, and
do it all. Here we go.
Come back with updated plans that hopefully satisfies Kathy.
I'm not sure why I had the impression it was going to have a bar. Maybe it's part of the restaurant.
Right.
It's going to be a bar and...
But how many people... There's an accessory bar to the restaurant, and the issue did come up. I think you probably read the Foster letter, where he said you can have a restaurant bar, but no nightclub, no tavern. Yes. So, I mean, he was pretty clear with that.
Okay.
No, I understand. I don't know how many people go to restaurants. Presumably most of you go once or twice a week maybe. I go with my wife. I much prefer sitting at the bar when I go to a restaurant. There is a change in culture of people going and sitting privately at tables to sitting in communal areas at a bar, not because you're drinking more at the bar in any way. It's got nothing to do with the drink. It's got to do with the interaction and seeing what's going on. Kitchens are opening up, so you can see behind them now. You can see the chefs in the kitchen. This is a whole just evolution of how food and beverage is being done. So when we say a bar, it's not about drink more than eating. It's about creating an infrastructure that supports that communal experience where you're sitting at the bar and you're eating at the bar, because that's what people like. And so that's kind of what it's about.
In lieu of the discussion we were having about culture, it would be wonderful, Mr. Evans, if you could get involved with the local schools.
So that's a great point. My 3 kids are at Southampton Elementary. We started in February with a program called iKids, stood for Innovation for Kids. We started in February. On Sunday mornings, we provided a drop-off program at our temporary location where parents from local schools could drop off their 6 to 12-year-olds. And we created a curriculum with the head of innovation from the Ross School, created a 2-hour program. And so the idea was adults could come and drop off their kids. They could walk to town. They could relax for a little bit while their kids were being educated.
I'd love to see an apprentice or mentor mentorship type of thing for the older students in the high school too, because if you're trying to keep them here,
Yeah.
that would be one.
100%. My dream, and this is a dream, I'm not going to act on it yet, but my dream is the building that we're vacating would potentially become that for those kids. I'm familiar, Mr. McFarlane, through Porter Bibb and your Southampton Media Center and so forth and some of those things, and we've already been in discussions about how this can all sort of connect together and being a resource for the teenagers who my kids will soon be, to continue that innovation culture all the way through. So very much part of the DNA, and Frank, who's been with us since day one helping this, also has children at the same school, and this is what we're trying to do. So, yes. Yeah, I mean, we talked about learning. We've had 50 events where we brought outside speakers in already, talking about topics, again, how to take Instagram photos, how to, all these kind of one-on-ones. We have a blockchain one this Saturday in partnership with the Harvard Business School. So we're bringing in, big third-party brands that have got an elevated community and bringing them into the Spur to showcase what we're doing and bring learning. I mean, learning is really part of the DNA of what we're all about. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Rose? Okay, we will now get we've had our conference, we're waiting for the stuff, Council.
Right, we'll submit a more
proceed,
formal application.
and thank you for coming. Okay. I guess, Bo, we can move to, Bo, it's all right, we can move to minute approvals before we terminate?
Correct.
Okay. We have minute approvals requested here for August 6th and August 27th. I just got a copy of August 27th. I would love to look at.
Yes, I did something today.
I just saw it. August 6th, I think I've been through it a couple of times, and I think last time I saw it, it looked fine.
You sent me comments, and they were all, I saw that everybody was attached on there. I didn't know that you did.
Yeah, so I assume no one got upset, and they're live happily ever after, as they say. Okay, in the future, if I send them in, if you would send them back so people get that last look to say, hey, it looks fine to me. Now, it's just the internet, people are really good on the internet. I think Jane is really good on the internet.
I accepted all the change. I didn't change anything other than what you put in.
Roy may say that I said something, and he said, no, you didn't. So it's having taken minutes for 50 years in various organizations, I understand there's sort of I call the last gas before the turnpike. We all want to agree that your memory is almost perfect, but just what we said is accurate, because there's some of these things that we phrase ourselves differently. Thank you. Okay. But I'm prepared to approach we accept the minutes of August 6th.
Because Ms. Conrad made two comments today about things that we said, which were totally not what we said.
Exactly. And the minutes have a new use coming. That's what worries me.
She's made a lifestyle out of that.
I know, but we will listen.
You going to approve them?
So I'll table a motion that we approve the minutes of August 6th, and I would like to do August 27th at the next meeting because I want to review what came. I think it's. I saw them as I was leaving my house.
No, we're not even going there yet.
Where?
I'll
August
make a
27th?
motion to approve the minutes for August 6th.
Yeah. Second.
Aye.
They're approved. We will get, thank you. That's fine. And the work session is that Monday in September and then October 1st. That's happy with everybody?
Here for the work session.
Okay, but will you make the first? Thank you.
Certainly plan to.
Boy, you going
I
to be in
will
town?
be here for all those meetings.
24th is the work session?
Yeah, work session on that Monday.
Okay.
So that's kind of the second Monday of the fall.
Mr. Chairman, have you heard anything from the mayor about a new addition to our board?
No, but I plan to talk to him. I'm talking to him consistently. He may just say, that's who you got. Who knows? We'll see. But it's being studied. Some people have called me up and saying they're volunteering. They did an ad in the newspaper, so we'll see what happens. And I will meet with them again on Thursday the 12th to tell them that when it comes to the village plan, we will be set with what they say, which is a conflict of interest under our section as to what is the village plan, because there's some real disagreement in it. We heard only from one merchant, but there's some real, and by the way, for taxpayers, the merchants here pay a major portion of the taxes as opposed to the people that show up. If you want to get the taxes, I've had it studied for other reasons, so we have to be responsible to it. If that's all right with you guys, I will just give just what I told these people.
Let's
If you want to change it, let's do it.
close the meeting.
Can we close it?
I think we
Can you
can.
make a motion?
I make a motion to close the meeting.
Seconded. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.